continues to be a dominant emotion in my life. I've been gripped with ever-present fear and terror, even when not in my conscious foreground my whole life. As a child, I had a recurring nightmare. The dream would start in some variation with me feeling afraid, needing to get away from something, but frozen in my ability to move, which made it all the more frightening. Somehow I would find a way to mobilize and begin to run, and as I picked up speed, I would ascend off the ground and start swimming through the air, flying through the air. And once I got above a certain level, I became invisible, and I could see everything going on below, hovering above the earth without being seen, the safety of not being seen. If someone were to come to my office now and tell me this kind of recurring dream, I would think to myself, what kind of experience leads a child to have this kind of recurring nightmare? The process of preparing this talk has taken me to the most challenging places in my history. It has taken me through terrifying and dreaded feelings of my childhood and the ongoing struggle in my adult life of confronting these paralyzing effects. One of the most fearful ventures for me is to be center stage, visible, and the focus of attention. Standing before a group to give a keynote speech is not something I ever imagined and quite frankly avoided at all costs. Yet, I am here today. This brings me to the question why I decided to say yes when I was invited by the SCP's committee. And the answer is ultimately I decided to come out of hiding. And if there were ever a place where I was going to do that, it was here in this warm community. Though knowing and believing that genuine warmth and support here in this community was not enough to carry me through to organizing and articulating. I carved out times in my schedule where I would have time to write, and rather than finding words on a page, I ended in extreme states of terror. Preparing this talk has truly been a living example of confronting my fear. And in doing so, I was brought into previously uncharted territory. This was the greatest challenge. What has been so difficult is that I didn't want what I was discovering to be true. As I was preparing my talk, I went back and I looked at a journal I kept when I was in my 20s. And I was struck that the words expressed indicated I knew something that I did not know on a conscious level. I only knew that letting the words fall out of me onto paper had a relieving effect. I think it is significant because it demonstrates that there was some part of me that understood something even though I wasn't conscious of that understanding. In March 1974, I wrote, "Troubled mind, oh troubled feelings, won't you tell me what's bothering you today? Alone, lonely, scared has moved in with me. Oh, won't you welcome it, and the fear will change to newfound freedom." Fear can be defined as the neurophysiological processes that prepare an organism to perform innate or learned responses to cope with danger. The need for protection from danger is universal among anything that is alive, from single-cell organisms to those as complex as us human beings, and the ability to protect is vital to survival. In human beings, the long period of time involved in the maturational process and the dependency on others for care make protection and safety a complicated, multifaceted affair. The infant, the child, and even the fetus in utero has a primary need for protection and safe attachment. This need continues through the child's maturation into adulthood, though the form of what that looks like evolves along the developmental course. Parental failure to provide attuned, empathic, loving connection and contact is dangerous. Fear, among other feelings, emanates from this lack. I have known my whole life that I've been afraid. As a child, I didn't know why I was afraid. Over the course of my adulthood, I learned, and am still learning, the core of my fear and the extent of the trauma that created such deep fear and terror. I think of the dynamics that created such extreme fear in me as having two different streams. There's the level of my family constellation and relationships, and there's the intergenerational trauma related to historical and cultural issues. I'm going to give you a small summary of my family background so that you'll have a context to understand what I'll be sharing about my experience living with fear. My immediate family is composed of my mother and my father and my 1.5 years younger sister. I was born in 1949 and grew up in New York City. My parents originally came from what is now called the Czech Republic. They left when they were barely adults themselves. My mother was 17 and my father was 23. They lived in London during World War II, and they moved to New York City in 1946 to begin a life in America. They had a community of friends who also had emigrated, and some also had lived in England during World War II. As a child, I didn't know why they and their friends and my uncles and aunts had all moved to America. But the general impression was that they wanted to live in the land of opportunity and for their children to have a life of opportunity. My mother was a very high energy, intense, domineering person with a strong need to be the center of attention. She was maternal in the sense that all of our needs for food and shelter were met, and she protected us from outer danger, but she was not soft. There was this hardness to her. She was angry. She was not somebody who I would feel comfortable turning to for comfort. And I didn't make the connection to knowing how afraid of her I was, but I knew I was afraid, and I believed that my fear meant that there was something wrong with me. There was an aspect of her that could be playful, as in getting into the sandbox and playing with my sister and me and other playful activities. And for that, I am grateful. My father was gentle, warm, and charismatic, and I adored him. In his presence, I felt like the sun was shining on me. But there was a great problem, as I came to understand as an adult. He didn't see who I was, and he related to me as his ideal projection of a daughter. That daughter was brilliant, someone highly achieving, the smartest, most outstanding girl in the class, someone who was confident, the class valedictorian. I was not that person. I was shy in my natural proclivities. I loved my father and I wanted to please him. And I felt tremendous pressure to be someone I was not. someone who I could not be no matter how I tried. My sister and I were very different from each other, and people would describe the difference as night and day. She was outgoing, a ball of energy, and seemingly unafraid. I was more shy and introverted. Our differences were a combination of being born with different temperaments and receiving very different projections from our parents, among other factors. When we were adults, we talked to each other about how we experienced growing up, and we both discovered that we each felt bad, and we had no idea that the other was feeling that way too. Now I'm going to make a strong statement. Unreality is terrifying. Denial of reality creates terror. I grew up in a family who behaved as if you can change reality by pretending it never happened. My parents never told us we were Jewish and that the reason they moved to a new country was to escape the Holocaust. I did not know that part of my history until I was 11. They had kept it so secret. There were signs, though. Since as early as I can remember, when the topic of religion came up, my mother would say, religion is bad because it's supposed to bring people together, but instead it pulls apart. It made me wonder why she would say that. Or when I was 7, my downstairs neighbor, Evie, and me had been playing outside in the neighborhood, and when I came back home, I told my mother that we had gone into the jewelry store down the block. What felt suddenly like coming from nowhere, my mother in a hysterical tone blasted out, "Don't you ever go into that store again with those Nazis." I was stunned. In preparing this talk, I realized on a deeper level the extent that my parents' post-traumatic Holocaust experience was living inside me. Here is an example. Generally, I don't experience fear in the form of panic attacks. As I was delving into the material I would present here, I found myself having panic attacks. I assume the panic was related to my fear of standing before a group to give a talk in this format and exposing myself in a personal way. This went on for a while, and I began waking up in the middle of the night in terror. One morning, January 6th to be precise, I woke up in a panic after having had 2 intense dreams. As I processed the dreams, I had a profound insight. I remembered my mother telling me when I was an adult that for years after they moved to New York, she would have nightmares and feel haunted by the memories of the time living through the war in London. The sirens, the bombs, the guilt of leaving her mother, who subsequently went to a concentration camp. In that moment, that morning, I realized her feelings were living inside my body. I was waking up in the middle of the night in panic and fear as she had.